Hello, and thank you for taking the time to listen to my CSP Capstone presentation titled Liberia's Sea Cucumbers in a Pickle, Managing a New Fishery to Protect Ecosystems and Livelihoods. There are 5 chapters to the story that I'm going to share with you today. In the first chapter, I'm going to describe the boom and bust pattern of sea cucumber exploitation that is playing out across the world. Then, I'm going to take you to Liberia, which is one of the latest frontiers for this global story. In chapter 3, I'll tell you about the opportunity I was given to lead the development of a sea cucumber management plan for Liberia. I'll describe the steps that I took with partners to create a roadmap towards this management plan in chapter 4. And finally, I'll outline how the success of my Capstone project will be used as a foundation for other fisheries management efforts in Liberia and elsewhere. To start us off, I need to introduce you to the main character in this story. This is a sea cucumber. Sea cucumbers are marine animals that live on the seabed. They have been eaten in China for at least 600 years as a prized delicacy. In the past 50 years, demand for sea cucumbers has soared. This is Hong Kong, the main market for sea cucumbers globally. Historically, sea cucumbers were harvested from coastal waters near Hong Kong to supply seafood markets. But fishing pressure on these easy access coastal areas caused sea cucumber populations to decline, and buyers looked to fisheries further afield to supply the market. Initially, they expanded into parts of the Western Pacific and the Indian Ocean, but over ensuing decades, overfishing depleted sea cucumber populations across the globe. Since the 1950s, global sea cucumber production has risen from less than 500 tons annually to almost 19,000 tons. And as wild sea cucumbers have been harder to source, prices have skyrocketed. You can see in this picture that some sea cucumbers can sell for up to $3,000 per kilo at end markets. This pattern of depleting fisheries and rising prices drives a boom and bust cycle of sea cucumber overexploitation, with a short period of highly lucrative productivity followed by a rapid decline in catches. This boom and bust cycle has played out so many times that it's now easy to predict. The cycle goes like this. Consumer demand causes a new fishery to open. Management is typically absent, so fishers catch too much and populations crash. This causes a drop in supply, causing prices to rise, which in turn signals new fisheries to open, kicking off another boom and bust cycle. This pattern has driven serial overexploitation of sea cucumber fisheries and serial depletion of sea cucumber populations at local and global scales. The depletion of sea cucumber populations causes dependent fishers to lose their livelihoods, species to become threatened with extinction, and countries to lose revenue from a valuable marine resource. But the negative effects of sea cucumber overexploitation extend further. Sea cucumbers are suspension feeders, which means that they feed by removing organic matter from the water. Without sea cucumbers, water can become dirty because their filtering capacity is removed. This trait, as a filter feeder, has earned them the label of ecosystem engineers, which means that they are particularly important for maintaining the health of marine habitats. So, eradicating sea cucumbers can reduce catches for other important commercial fisheries and damage the health of marine ecosystems. This brings us to chapter 2, Liberia, the latest frontier for sea cucumber fishing. The impacts of sea cucumber overexploitation have been felt across the globe, but still buyers are looking for new fisheries to supply the market. West Africa flew under the radar for the past 70 years, but this changed in the mid-2000s when investors found productive sea cucumber fisheries in Sierra Leone. These investors trained local fishermen like Ernest and Mohammed to collect sea cucumbers using dive equipment. Fishing was easy at first, but it was a short-lived bonanza. As more people saw the opportunity for fast money from sea cucumbers, the fishery expanded. With more divers and buyers, fishing became harder. Divers were having to swim deeper and stay down for longer to catch the same quantity of sea cucumbers that they used to catch in a matter of hours. Sierra Leone was seeing the same predictable boom and bust pattern that had played out in other sea cucumber fisheries around the world. As catches diminished in Sierra Leone, Ernest, Mohammed, and some of their friends packed up their equipment and set sail for Liberia, where they had heard that sea cucumber populations were still untapped and healthy. Liberia is a small West African country, about a quarter the size of California. Over half of Liberia's population lives on the coast, and fishing is super important to these communities. Fish provides 65% of people's dietary protein, and over 35,000 people are employed in fishing. Ernest, Mohammed, and their friends found vast quantities of sea cucumbers in Liberia. One of the divers, Charlie, told me, "The highest catch for me in Liberia this year is 77 kilos, but normally it's between 40 and 60 kilos per night. To get that kind of amount in Sierra Leone now, well, you'd be diving until the next day." They've returned every year since, but recently their catches have started to drop, just like they did in Sierra Leone. In March, Mohammed told me, "The first year we came to Liberia in 2016, we were catching 130, 140, sometimes even 150 kilos per night. In 2021, we can catch maybe 50, 60 kilos per night. It's not so easy now." Whilst these are still very high landings by sea cucumber standards, rapidly diminishing catches points to one thing: Liberia is on the brink of a boom and bust. That brings us to Chapter 3, a rare opportunity. In 2019, the National Fisheries and Aquaculture Authority, or NAFA, the government body responsible for Liberia's fisheries, adopted a new Fisheries Act. Under the new act, it is responsible for developing fisheries management plans. NAFA had never developed a management plan before, and it decided that sea cucumbers would be the perfect fishery to manage as a pilot. But in 2019, almost nothing was known about the fishery, other than that it existed in some form and was happening somewhere in the remote reaches of Liberia's southeastern coast. Now, NAFA is a small agency responsible for overseeing a vast diversity of fisheries issues, and it quite literally had bigger fish to fry. The agency didn't have the capacity to spend weeks in remote field sites collecting data on an obscure new fishery. So, the effort to manage the fishery needed a team to drive the work forward. That's where the Sea Cucumber project comes in. I saw this opportunity and I was extremely excited to help get this project off the ground. If we succeeded, then it would be the first fisheries management plan for Liberia and the first for sea cucumbers in West Africa. I set up the Sea Cucumber project as a vessel to drive the management effort forward. The project would work with a broad coalition of partners, including Conservation International, NAFA's field-based teams, the sea cucumber divers, and a team of enumerators to lay the foundation for a sea cucumber management plan. And that brings us to Chapter 4, a roadmap for management. For people who aren't familiar with fisheries management plans, they're a practical tool that help to balance the human and non-human characteristics of a fishery to achieve specific goals. There are 5 main steps to developing a fishery management plan. First, data must be collected and analyzed to develop an understanding of the fishery's dynamics. Next, stakeholders and experts must be consulted to identify goals for the fishery. Based on the information presented in the data, they should decide upon management approaches for the fishery that support these goals. Once management approaches have been agreed upon, budgets must be assigned to each aspect of management. And finally, the management strategies and regulations can be implemented and then reviewed against the attainment of predefined goals. For my capstone, under the banner of the Sea Cucumber project, I led the effort to complete the first 3 of these steps. I compiled the outputs of these steps into a roadmap towards the sustainable and equitable management of Liberia's sea cucumber fishery, which would serve to guide NAFA and other stakeholders as they implemented the management plan. So, the practical aspect of my capstone involved me completing these first 3 steps towards the management plan. The primary output of this work was a roadmap for management. and NAFA is responsible for completing the final 2 steps of the management process. I'm now going to show you how we completed those first 3 steps. First, we had to collect baseline information about the fishery. I split my lines of inquiry into 3 categories: environmental, social, and economic. I then identified key research questions pertaining to each category. Example questions include: what is the target species? What is its preferred habitat? How many people are directly involved in the fishery? What is the local perception of the fishery? What volume of sea cucumbers are being caught and how much is it worth? And to answer these questions, I trained a team of dedicated sea cucumber project enumerators to help me to collect information. Together, we monitored catches by weighing and measuring hundreds of sea cucumbers. We collected samples and sent them to experts for species identification. We documented fishing and processing methods, and we interviewed sea cucumber fishers. We quickly learned that the fishery is very small scale. There's only 1 dive team currently working in Liberia, with a total of 8 divers and 8 auxiliary workers. They are all men, all of them are from Sierra Leone bar 1, and they do all of the fishing and processing themselves. The target species is caught over rocky substrates between 5 and 30 meters, and we're still waiting on the results of the expert analysis to confirm the identity of the target species, but it is almost certainly a member of the Isosticopus genus. There is no evidence for local sea cucumber consumption or Liberian-led fishing. It is a very novel fishery for Liberia. And there is a burgeoning local and international interest in the fishery, driven by local perceptions of the fishery as a lucrative source of additional income, and by international perceptions of Liberia as an untouched haven for sea cucumbers. We also learned that the fishery is extremely dangerous. Decompression sickness and other diving-related injuries are common. We learned that divers caught 2,700 kilos of sea cucumbers this season, which is roughly 17,500 animals. And divers caught on average 37 kilos per night, for which they were paid $1.75 per kilo. Processed catches are sold in Liberia and Sierra Leone and then transported to regional hubs before being exported to end markets in East Asia. The next step was to identify goals for the fishery. Working with our coalition of partners, I hosted training and visioning exercises for NAFA's staff. I convened public meetings in 7 communities, reaching over 150 people, and I facilitated national stakeholder workshops, during which I shared our findings and co-developed a series of fisheries goals with participants. A few examples of these goals included that the fishery should be sustainable over the long term. It should be operated by Liberian and fishers and traders. Economic returns should be maximized within sustainable limits, and benefits should be shared with local communities. So we now had all of this information about the fishery and a series of co-designed goals to guide us. That left us with step 3, to design management approaches. Through another round of discussions and workshops aimed at ensuring participation from all stakeholders, we identified management measures that were informed by best practices from other contexts around the world, grounded in robust evidence that we collected in step 1, and developed through an open, transparent, and participatory process. A few examples of management measures include that NAFA will issue no more than 2 fishing licenses at a cost of $1,500 per license until more information is available about the target stock. Fishers will comply with a voluntary 12-centimeter minimum legal landing size. Partners will provide diving and processing training to Liberian communities. NAFA, sea cucumber divers and communities will formalize a process for the distribution of local concessions. And NAFA will strengthen export controls to leverage a 10% export tariff on sea cucumber products. After completing these steps, I compiled our findings and recommendations in the management roadmap. It includes the first detailed characterization of the fishery and bespoke, contextually relevant and co-designed management approaches tailored to stakeholders' goals. The roadmap has been adopted by NAFA and is forming the basis for the fishery management plan. To finalize the fishery management plan, NAFA needs to complete these last two steps. And that brings us to our last chapter, looking to the future. As I mentioned earlier, NAFA is responsible for finalizing the budget before it can implement the management strategies in the roadmap. The good news is that I've been working with NAFA over the past weeks to complete this task and draft the complete fishery management plan. In fact, we just sent it to experts at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations for a final review. All being well, it will be ready to implement in time for the reopening of the fishery in September. We've also had the amazing news that the FAO will provide funding to support the management effort, so we can hit the ground running come September. This all means that we've got 90% of the way to developing Liberia's first fisheries management plan, which will be the first for sea cucumbers in West Africa. The management plan will support sea cucumber divers' livelihoods, create new employment opportunities for coastal communities, and it will safeguard the critical role that sea cucumbers play in marine ecosystems. Finally, it will act as a template for managing other, more complex fisheries, such as those for shark fin and fish maw, also known as fish swim bladders. Importantly, it will interrupt the boom and bust cycle that we've seen play out across the world, setting Liberia up to be a bright spot in the global story of sea cucumber depletion. So, in summary of those 5 chapters, sea cucumbers are on the ropes across the globe, but there are a handful of locations that have evaded overexploitation. Liberia is one of those places, and through my capstone, I've led the development of a sea cucumber fishery management plan to protect sea cucumbers, ecosystems, and livelihoods. It is the first fishery management plan for Liberia, and the first for sea cucumbers in West Africa, and it is laying the foundation for more ambitious management efforts. As I've reiterated through this talk, this whole project was rooted in principles of participation and shared ownership, and as a result, there were many people involved in the production of this work. There are too many to name in the time that I have left, but I've put a few names up on the screen. I'd also like to thank my wonderful supervisors, Dr. Elena Finkbeiner and Professor Katie Sito, and also Anne and Sarah for running an incredible master's program. Thanks also to my partners and sponsors. And if you'd like to hear more about the world of West African sea cucumbers, visit this link to watch an interview with Charlie Cole, a sea cucumber diver from Sierra Leone. Thank you very much for your time.